who are going to share with us what happens after you apply to US colleges and universities. All right. So before we get started, I want to go over a little bit about the agenda. Okay. What are we going to cover? And today we're going to briefly overview what is Education USA. Yes. Then our guests are going to share with us what happens after you submit, right? After you click that submit button, what happens on the side of the universities. And then we'll have space for Q&A. If you are joining us on Zoom, please make sure that you send your questions to me, Education USA Guatemala, so I can centralize them and we can get to them. And if you're joining us on Facebook, please write your questions in the comment sections and we'll also try to get to them. Okay, so I am really happy to welcome our guests. We have Shannon O'Hagan from University of Missouri, Abby Kincanon from University of Colorado Boulder, Aisha Wong from University of Florida, Lorenzo Wilcox, University of Oregon, and Samantha Thompson from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you so much for your time and for the valuable information you will share with us today. I'm really excited to discover the mystery, what happens after students apply. So to begin with, really briefly, a refresher on what is Education USA. Remember, we are a network from the Department of State of the US that provides accurate and current information on applications to US higher education. That means undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees. Currently, we are working 100% virtually. Here in Guatemala, Education USA is based at our only binational center, Instituto Guatemalteco Americano. And like I said, we are working 100% virtually. If you don't follow us already, please do so. We share lots of valuable information such as these kinds of sessions, but also cultural elements of the US, if that is a destination of interest to you. And so before we get to the information, into the informative element of this, I want to ask you, if you're joining us on Zoom, you will see on your screen a poll that is going to ask you where you're joining us from. Perhaps you're joining us from here, from the Americas, maybe it's North America, Central America, the Caribbean, or maybe you're joining us from other parts of the world and it's 2 a.m. with you. Everyone's welcome. Thanks so much for being here. And then also tell us, are you applying this year? Have you applied to your US journey? If so, did you do early decision, early action, regular, or you're not applying yet? And thirdly, tell us if you have already sent your stuff, right? Or if it's not the time right now. Okay, so we'll give like 10 more seconds to get a little bit of notion of who we're talking with. And again, remember, you can share your questions in the chat box to me, Education USA Guatemala. And if you're joining us on Facebook, write them in the comment section. Okay, we will have a moment to respond to questions. And now without, let's see our results. So we have lots of Central America peeps from Zoom. And we have a mix, some early decision, some early action, and some are not applying yet. Okay, so it'll be interesting to know and explore what happens on the side of US colleges and universities. So without further ado, please take it away, guests, with all of this valuable information you have for us. Thanks so much, Shannon.
Great, thank you so much for passing it over to us, and thank you all for joining us today, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook. We really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you all. We do know that it can sometimes be a little bit of a mystery or seem that way of what really happens after you submit that application. So that's why we have joined together today to share a little bit more insight from the admissions perspective, to give you a little more information about what really happens after admission, so you can know what to expect and where your application is throughout that process and how decisions are made at different universities. We will introduce each of our institutions as well, and we will also leave time at the end for questions and answers. We'll also put into the chat a really brief contact form that you're welcome to fill out. We'll put it kind of here towards the beginning and then also at the end in case you'd like to receive additional information from any of our institutions. I know we did do some really brief introductions already, but just as a quick reminder, we'll kind of go down the row again so you can see names and faces of who represents which institution here today. So my name is Shannon and I am with the University of Missouri, which is located centrally in the US in Columbia, Missouri. Aisha?
Hi everyone, my name is Aisha Wong and I represent the University of Florida, which is located in beautiful Gainesville, Florida.
Hi everyone, my name is Sam Thompson. I'm an international admissions counselor with the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Madison, Wisconsin.
Hi everyone, my name is Abby Kincannon and I am an international admissions counselor at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Lorenzo Wilcox. I'm an international admissions counselor at the University of Oregon, and we are located in the city of Eugene, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest of the US. And if we go to the next slide, I can just give you a brief explanation as to why we've all decided to come together and present to you on this topic. But all of us here, we happen to represent the flagship universities of our states and our regions. And usually these universities are some of the most well-known institutions of a particular location, usually the first founded in that particular state as well, and with the highest research profile and the most doctoral programs. So that's just kind of an idea of what institutions we all represent. We all really encourage and emphasize research and experiential learning at all of our institutions, and that's something that you'll hear about as we go through the presentation. But we all happen to be top tier 1 research institutions, as well as members of the Association of American Universities, which is the AAU for short. And it's basically a select group of 65 universities in North America. About half of them are public institutions, and we happen to represent 5 of those. And these are institutions that conduct exceptional research on their campuses and have top-ranked academic programs. So we're definitely proud to be representing these institutions. And one additional thing that we have in common is we all have Division I athletics on our campuses. And Division I is the highest level of competition when it comes to athletics in the US within universities. And so while it might be really competitive to get into any of our particular sports teams, the great thing with that is that you can usually get athletic scholarships out of it. So that's just some of the few things that we all have in common, and I'll go ahead and pass it on so we can get going with the presentation.
Great, so we are going to talk briefly about application processing and kind of how requirements will vary from one institution to another. So of course, this is kind of right before you actually submit the application, but we thought this would still be a helpful context because it relates to what happens after the application is submitted and processed. So with this in mind, it's important to be aware that the requirements vary from one institution to another in the US. As you're likely aware, the US higher education system is quite diverse, and so you have a lot of different types of institutions, and it's very decentralized. So each university sets their own admissions requirements and deadlines. And similarly, the actual process for reviewing applications will vary from one institution to another. So our intention is to provide you with some general information that will hopefully be applicable to most schools you're applying to, but we thought it might also be helpful to kind of go through and provide you with some information about our own deadlines and requirements to give you some examples of some of the similarities and differences among our institutions represented today, which again are all large public research universities. And so I'll have Abby with Colorado Boulder kick us off.
Great, thank you, Shannon. So at the University of Colorado Boulder, we have 2 major deadlines. Our early action deadline is November 15th, and we will let students know no later than February 1st of their decision. And then our regular decision deadline is January 15th, and we will let students know no later than April 1st of their decision. We do require 2 personal essays as well as at least 1 academic letter of recommendation. We do require high school transcripts equivalent to US grades 9 through 12 in both the native language and an English translation, unless your school automatically provides transcripts in English. And then for the fall 2021 semester, or for fall 2021 applicants, we have gone test optional, meaning that we are not requiring ACT or SAT for admissions or scholarship purposes. And then after a student has been academically admitted, we then ask for proof of English proficiency, and we accept Duolingo, TOEFL, and IELTS.
Great. So at the University of Missouri, some things are similar and some things are a little bit different. So we process applications on a rolling basis, which means we actually do not have a specific application deadline. Students can apply throughout the academic year, and they will also receive admissions decisions on a rolling basis. So once we've been able to process their application, we go ahead and let them know of that admission decision. We do not require an essay for admission to our academic programs at Mizzou. However, for students wanting to be considered for our honors college, we do have an application and a few additional supplemental materials. So what we're primarily focused on at Mizzou are your academic records or transcripts from throughout all of high school. So we'll use that to make the large part of our admission decision. We do require an English proficiency exam, and we actually do require that prior to admission to the university. And there's a number of English proficiency exams we accept, including TOEFL, IELTS, and Duolingo. And then we do not require the SAT or ACT for admission. So we're also test optional when it comes to international students as well as US citizens. However, we do recommend submitting them if you have them available for scholarships. And I will pass it on to Sam.
Thanks, Shannon. So at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we have 2 decision periods. Our first is early action, which is non-binding. The deadline is November 1st, coming up pretty quick here, and students all receive their decisions at the same time by the end of January. We also have a regular decision deadline of February 1st, with all students receiving their decisions by the same time at the end of March. We do have 2 required essays you have to submit. We accept both the common application and the UW system application. We find most international students fill out the common application, which is great. If you do the common application, your first essay prompt is just simply one of the Common App prompts. And your second essay is why Wisconsin? Why do you want to study at UW? And why do you want to study what you want to study? You do have to submit your transcripts or self-report your grades on the Common App. We are test optional for SAT, ACT through spring of 2023. And an English proficiency test, TOEFL, IELTS, or Duolingo is only required if you haven't been taught in English for all 4 years of high school. Florida.
Thanks, Sam. At the University of Florida, we do have 1 regular decision deadline, so we don't have an early action deadline. We have 1 deadline of November 1st for the application, and we accept both the common application or the coalition application, and there is a required personal essay. You can choose from one of the 7 prompts on either the common application or the coalition application, and then you may also complete additional essays for our honors program or Innovation Academy program. And then, of course, we're going to require as well transcripts from our applicants to look at your high school grades. And as of right now, we are still requiring the SAT and or the ACT for freshman admission. There is a small chance that that may change. If that does change in the future, that information will be available on our website. And then we do not require proof of English proficiency, although you can submit that to us if you'd like. And in that case, we'd accept the TOEFL, the IELTS, or the Duolingo English test.
Yeah, so for the University of Oregon, we are actually on 3 different platforms. So we are on the Common App, we're on the Coalition, and we have our own application through our main website. And it doesn't matter which way you apply, kind of whatever works best for you. We have 2 main deadlines to be aware of. So we have our early action deadline of November 1st, which is coming up in a few days. And we have a regular decision deadline of January 15th. Basically, if you apply by November 1st, you're guaranteed a decision by December 15th. If you apply by January 15th, you're guaranteed a decision before April 1st. When it comes to the different materials that we require, we do have a personal statement essay that you can write. You can choose, one of the 7 Common App prompts, or really choose your own prompt and write about anything that you would like to write about. We also, at first, we require your self-reported academic records instead of your transcripts. So basically, you'll be able to fill out all the courses that you've taken in high school and all the grades that you've received. Later on, if you're admitted, we would require your official transcripts, both in Spanish and English. And then when it comes to test scores, we are actually a test optional institution when it comes to the SAT or ACT, so we don't require that for admissions or for scholarships, but we do require English proficiency scores. These can be the TOEFL, the IELTS, or the Duolingo English test. So on the next slide, I can start out by telling you about different ways you can submit your application materials. I'll also cover the different types of admission you can expect, as well as how you can continue to keep track of your application status and how you can follow up with that. So I'll cover that in the next couple of slides. But first, when it comes to material submission, it's important to note that it's really not a one-size-fits-all for all universities. There's many ways in which different institutions will accept your documents, such as English proficiency scores, SATs, transcripts, letters of recommendation, different things like that. So it's always good if you have a particular institution in mind that you reach out to one of us, the counselors, so that you can really know for sure what way you need to submit a particular document. But what you see listed here on the screen is, the most common ways that you can submit your application materials. So through the Common App, you can definitely, your counselor can upload transcripts as well as letters of recommendation. You can always connect with us via email. I know for some institutions here today, counselors can submit official transcripts via email. So that is one option for some institutions, and for others, that might not be a possibility. So it's good to know and find out ahead of time. And also you'll notice that, most, if not all of us, will have a portal or a status page that after you submit your application, you'll get a link to, and you'll be shown how to log in and how to check your admission status, your decision, the different requirements that you're still needing to submit. So sometimes you can upload documents like financial statements or different things like that through that particular portal. And also there's, the postal mail for some institutions. You usually have to send maybe official transcripts through the mail and physically, and that might be the only way that they accept these documents. So again, it's not one size fits all. It's always good to find out from your particular institution, what they would accept and how they would accept it. But on the next slide, I can give you an idea of how you can, keep track of your application status, how you can keep track of, what documents you're still needing to submit. As you might imagine, all of our institutions have some way of knowing, where particular students are at in their application process. And it's through different systems, called CRMs, but basically it helps us really connect with you and help you troubleshoot different parts of the application that you might be needing some assistance with. So it's always great, again, to connect with us if you have any questions as you're going through the application process. But after you submit your application, again, you will be most likely referred to a application portal or a status page where, that's probably where you will see your admission decision at first, where you'll be able to gauge what documents you're still needing to submit. And if you need to upload any documents, you will probably have the opportunity to upload some of those through that particular website. And the other key thing to know is application follow-up. So communication is definitely key, especially for this year, as many of us have different admission requirements or just new things going on, new updates coming out. So definitely, it's always great if you can continue to check your application status page, but also don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And especially now, I think it's a little easier to connect with us via Zoom or email, just because everything has kind of gone virtual. And so don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. We can always connect and help you troubleshoot those, and answer your questions if you have any regarding the application process. But the other thing with that is to always check your email consistently and regularly. Always use the same email if you're applying to different institutions, just for you to make sure you can manage all the information that's coming your way. Check the spam folder as well if you need to. and again, be consistent with names and the email addresses that you might use on certain documents so that we can, whenever we receive a particular document from you, we can match it without any problems to your application record. So those are just a few key things to know about, but I think my main message would be don't hesitate to reach out. We're always here to just connect with you and help you and answer those questions. And on the next slide, I can give you an idea of what types of admission or deadlines you might encounter. And from the earlier poll, I can see that most of you are probably familiar with some of these deadlines. So you'll find that across the US, different institutions will have different deadlines. So we have early action deadlines, which most of us here have. Some are November 1st, around there. And basically, early action is, if you apply by that date, you will hear back with an admissions decision earlier than if you applied by the regular deadline. So that's, the main benefit that comes out of that particular deadline. There's also early decision, which basically institutions that have this deadline, if you apply by then and you're admitted, you usually have to commit to that particular institution. So that's a key distinction that you need to be aware of. And then we have the regular deadline, which basically, if you apply by then, you can usually still qualify for the majority of the scholarships that are offered, and you'll just hear back at a later time with regards to your admission decision. When it comes to the different types of admission, you'll find that some institutions have open admission, which is, they're generally community colleges, which basically have the main mission of providing access to education for all. So they might not have very selective different criteria that you have to meet in order to be a student in that particular institution. There's also institutions that have threshold admission types, which basically, for example, it could be if a particular institution has, you need to have a GPA of 3.2 to be admitted. That might be a requirement that you need to be aware of. Or there's also, very selective institutions or limited access programs where, again, they might look at your academic record a little more closely and might require you to have higher scores and test scores in order to be able to apply to a particular program or institution. So those are key things to be aware of as you go and start your college search process or go and start applying to different institutions. So I'll go ahead and pass it on.
Great, thank you, Lorenzo. So in this next section, we are really going to talk about how admissions decisions are made, from what we look at in your application to the actual review process and the various people who may be reviewing your application. So the first piece that we are going to talk about is holistic review. So as you're going through the admissions process, you will likely see holistic review thrown around. And while this is by no means not the only way that universities review students for admissions, it is the way that a lot of universities review students for admissions, including our 5 universities. So what does it mean? Basically, with holistic review, we are considering everything that is sent in support of your application when considering you for your admissions. And later on in this presentation, we are going to talk a bit more in detail about what some of those various pieces may be. But it's important to keep in mind that while we will consider everything sent in support of your application, not every piece will carry the same weight. And what is important in the admissions review will really vary from university to university, but also within a university, it could also vary by program to program or college to college. So it's just really important, if you do have questions about that, to have a conversation with your admissions counselor and see if they can provide any insight. So just kind of what holistic review all entails, it is a very thorough review of your application and all of the submitted materials. Because we are academic institutions, we are going to place, or most likely we're going to place a lot more weight on your previous academic work, which I'll talk in a bit more detail here in a second. But do know that we know that you're a person beyond just your transcripts and grades. So a lot of universities will ask for additional materials like essays, letters of recommendation, or a resume. So in this next section, we're going to talk just a bit about how we review your curriculum, because we as admissions counselors know that the type of education or curriculum that you're in will really vary from country to country, from city to city, from school to school, and even within the school, the type of curriculum offered could vary. So we as international admissions counselors, we have a lot of resources available to us, one of them being Education USA, in which we can learn a bit more about the context of your school, but also have those discussions with perhaps the school counselor just to gain a bit more insight. So we understand that some schools only offer a national curriculum. However, other schools may offer an international curriculum like AP, IB, or AGSC, or IGCSE or A levels. And then some of our students as well are able to take university classes while they're still in high school. So we definitely keep all of that in mind when reading your application and looking at your transcripts and really the school context. As we're reviewing that information, as I had mentioned earlier, the review process will really vary from institution to institution, but do know that we will, and I'll talk about this in a bit more detail here in a bit, but we do look at the balance between the rigor of the classes that you're taking, as well as the grades that you have. We're also looking to see what classes you are taking, as that may impact your admission decision depending on what you're applying to. As Lorenzo had mentioned previously, with the review process at some universities and for like some of those more competitive universities, it may be that we do that holistic review, whereas at other universities or other programs, it may be that threshold admission where you're required to meet a particular GPA or test score requirement. So on the next page, I'll dive just a bit more into the academic factors. So universities are definitely going to look at your high school transcripts to take a look to see what classes you were enrolled in, to see what your grades are in those classes. I always encourage my students to reach out to the schools that they're applying to see if those schools do require you to have your GPA converted. And it really varies from institution to institution, so definitely worth asking. Another piece that could play a role in the admission decision, and you had heard us talk about this a bit earlier, is test scores, which would include either ACT or SAT score. So once again, reach out to your admissions counselors to see if they are requiring them this year, if you're applying this year, or if you're still a few years away, just to make sure that you have that most up-to-date information. And then another factor that we as admissions counselors and admissions committees consider is the rigor of the classes that you're taking. So for instance, with some STEM programs, your admissions committees are really going to want to see that you're taking the most challenging STEM courses. Now, do keep in mind that we understand that you may have some limitations depending on the school or the curriculum that you're in. And this is certainly something that we keep in mind. However, if you do have the opportunity to take some of those more challenging or advanced classes at your school, that will definitely be something that we look for. So I will go ahead and pass it over to Sam to talk in a bit more detail about some of those additional factors.
Thanks, Abby. So another thing that often we're looking at for international students, especially as institutions, is English proficiency scores. And you should know that universities use multiple methods to assess language readiness in your application. So we might be looking at the TOEFL or the IELTS Duolingo test, maybe some of the sub-scores if you've taken the SAT or ACT. We're also looking at your essays, your English class grades, etc. And many times we use a combination of all of these factors to make a decision. And also different universities are placing different weight on each of these pieces. It's important to know and be aware of competitive ranges or minimums that might exist at an institution for the TOEFL, IELTS, or Duolingo English score. And in some cases, you can qualify for a waiver for the English proficiency test, but of course, these qualifications vary by institution as well. So some institutions like mine will grant you an English proficiency waiver if you've been taught in English for all 4 years, others will not. So it's something you definitely want to check in with the institution as well when you're considering applying. It's also important to think about prepping and practicing for your English proficiency tests. These are something that we take seriously. We look at them as part of your holistic review. So make sure that just like any other standardized test, you're taking the time to get to know how to take the test and what will be on the test itself. So with that, we're going to dive into some of the other non-academic factors that we're looking at in your application. And as you can see here, there are a host of different things that you've probably seen before. We're looking at your resume. So that's kind of your activities, what you've been involved in. And again, institutions will place a different emphasis on activities and what they're looking for that. But in general, there usually isn't one specific activity or piece of involvement that we're looking for our students, generally just that students have been involved. Some institutions will also offer interviews, and if they do that, I encourage, if it's optional, that you do seek out and do the interview portion. You may be interviewed by an admissions counselor yourself or by an alum of the institution. It's just another place for you to showcase your interest and fit for the university that you're applying to. Letters of recommendation are a great place that we're looking for more information if we require them or if they're optional from somebody who can speak to your academic abilities or character outside of or in class. So this is something that if you're looking at somebody to ask to write a letter of recommendation, you really want to talk to a teacher or a counselor, somebody who knows you well and who can speak about you uniquely and tell your story too, because they also share very valuable information that we consider in review. Additional information you might send to us. Some programs might be looking for a portfolio if you're interested in art. Students have sent us all kinds of additional information with their application in the past. I've mentioned I've gotten rap videos, I've gotten poems, I've gotten books. And if you are sending that, in most cases, institutions will look at that and consider it. But I do want to ask you as students to really question, what is this additional piece of information really showing about me that's adding to me as an applicant that isn't already in my application? Make sure it's something vital and important and you're not just sending to send it. There's also a section on the common application where you can list additional information out if you think that would be helpful. So context, whether that's something that's happened at school or in your life that you think it's vital and important that we know. And then finally, some universities do track a demonstrated interest. All of our institutions do not, but this is something that you can always ask the admissions counselor and get more information on that. Demonstrated interest just means that if you've been on a tour, they might be tracking it. If they're tracking how many times you're contacting counselors or reaching out to them with questions, et cetera. All universities who do this in a very different way. So you definitely want to follow up with your admissions counselors to see if it's something they even do. And the last piece that I want to mention here, and that I think that we get the most questions about as admissions counselors, is the essay. And what is most important and what are you looking at in my essay? The truth of the matter is that we're looking at both the content and the structure of your essay. So as I mentioned before, we're looking at, some of those grammar pieces, making sure that you're ready for college-ready writing when you're at an institution, but we're also looking at the content of your essay and whether or not you're answering the prompt. And my biggest advice to you when you're writing the essay is be you. There isn't one specific thing we want to see. We want to learn about you and your experience. So just make sure you take the time, tailor the essays for each institution you're applying to as much as you can, because we are definitely trying to make sure that you're a good fit for our institution, and we use the essays for that a lot. And I'll just round it out with some other things that we do take into consideration when we review your applications. Abby mentioned this with academics, but your environment and the context in which you are living, the school you attend, the country that you're in, the city that you're in, the curriculum that you're taking, what you've had access to is all taken into account. So we're not comparing a student from Guatemala to a student from China to a student from Canada. It's you in the context of your school, in the context of what you've been offered and opportunities that you've been given in kind of the environment that you're living in. Some academic areas and what you might be interested in may also have a certain emphasis placed on them in the review by the institution. So there are some competitive entry programs at certain institutions, for example, like engineering at mine is one. So depending on what you're majoring in, there might be certain course areas that we're looking at a little bit deeper, or things that we want to see a little bit more or a different type of fit for, depending on what you're studying. And then finally, of course, we know that this year has been absolutely just bonkers for everybody, and people have had tons of challenges with COVID-19. So we are taking those into account, and we are flexible and know that this year has not been what you would call traditional. Um, so just make sure that you know that when we're reading applications, we're being flexible with that too.
Yeah, so the next thing that we want to talk about are going to be the actual steps of the review process. And I'll preface this by saying that every institution's process is going to be different. It would be very difficult to find, even 2 institutions in the US that have the exact same admissions review and decision-making process. Sometimes the number of staff that an office has, or the number of applications that an institution might receive, and the types of things that they require from applicants can all play a role in how they're making their decisions, and how they're issuing those decisions and how that process is structured. So there is no one way that an institution will typically review its applicants. Generally, however, there are always going to be multiple steps or multiple levels that an application has to go through before a decision can be made. And so you'll find that the common thread is that this is a multi-level process, and that there are usually a pretty wide range of people that kind of play a role in making that decision. And generally, it's going to start with the admissions counselor, and that's the person that kind of serves on the front line of the process. So they spend a lot of their time, sometimes weeks or months, traveling, meeting students, visiting school counselors, and building relationships so that they can gather information about what that environment is like, what opportunities exist for the students in that particular school, and kind of gaining that understanding and that context they need in order to bring that back to their office to kind of shape those decisions. So they play a very important role, and usually they're the first person that you're going to want to be in touch with as you kind of navigate this process. And they're also typically responsible for reading applications and making recommendations on students. So they're kind of that first level of review, and kind of create that understanding for the other individuals in the office who aren't necessarily going to the schools and meeting the students. And after being reviewed by admissions counselor, a student's application will sometimes go on to a committee level review. And typically committees are comprised of senior staff within the admissions office or senior leadership, and can sometimes include other stakeholders from across campus, especially perhaps if that institution has a more decentralized admissions process. If they're admitting into specific academic programs, you might find deans or professors from those programs also serving on admissions committees. And committees exist because the thinking is that groups make better decisions than individuals, because they're utilizing a wider range of experiences, a wider range of ideas and feelings. And this helps counter any potential biases that there might exist within the admissions process. So the committee will often make the bulk of the final decisions for the applicant pool, and will often take into consideration the admissions counselor's recommendations and any information that's provided to them to provide that context so they can make better decisions. They also tend to primarily focus on the students that might be kind of walking that line between being admitted or denied or waitlisted. So they're looking really closely at applicants to determine, where they fit into this pool and whether or not they're going to be admissible to that particular institution and can be successful at that particular institution. However, they are not necessarily the final stop. So you'll see on this next slide that there is a third level of review, and a third part of that decision-making process, and that's the director's review. And at the end of the day, the admissions director, or directors, if you're at an institution like mine that has 2, they will have the final say in all of the decisions that are made. And that means that they can change or alter decisions that have already been made by either the committee or by the admissions officers. So they really are that kind of final level. And there are a lot of factors that could go into a director's decision making when it comes to shaping the class. So they could be looking at data, institutional goals, institutional priorities, input from other leadership and stakeholders counselors on campus to kind of determine what that freshman class should look like. And so, for instance, if an institution is required by the state to have a certain percentage of in-state students in that freshman class, the director would need to go behind and make sure that that number is met. So they are responsible for kind of making adjustments to the admissions pool to ensure that certain requirements are met and certain policies are met that are important to the university and to its stakeholders. School counselors also play an important role in the process. First, because they provide a lot of that context for admissions representatives. So they can personally explain to us what your educational environment is like, what opportunities have existed for you. And also they can kind of let us know if there have been any mistakes or changes or errors as far as, you know, your academic history or your courses or grades are concerned. So they really are an important piece of the puzzle, and oftentimes we'll connect with them along with the students. Another important thing that can often be overlooked or not well known about is the role that legislation might play in the admissions process for us and the way that an institution might make their decisions. So each of our institutions, especially as state institutions, you know, are governed by state legislation. And that can be a pretty in-depth governance, or it can be something that doesn't play as much a role in how we build our policies. But either way, usually there is some facet that's related to the state that an institution is located in or to the federal government. So that also plays a role in how an institution might shape its class as far as priorities and goals that that state or that government might have set for them. And so generally, the main point is that there are a lot of different factors that kind of go into this review process, and it is multi-level, and there are a lot of different people kind of playing a role in it. But the main thing is that us as institutions, we're trying to make the best decisions possible given the information that we have and the goals that have been set forth before us. So we really are trying to understand, you know, what's best for our institution and also what's best for you as a student. Are you going to be successful here? And so I'm going to go ahead and pass along to Shannon for an example.
Great. And in the interest of time, so we do have an applicant example here, and we do want to make sure we're leaving enough time for Q&A for you all. So I'm actually just going to kind of really skip through this piece of it because it just further illustrates how each university reviews the materials differently. And so this is something that, depending on how the Q&A goes, and if we have time for, we can maybe go a little bit more in depth into this. But we were just going to illustrate that we receive a lot of different pieces of information when an application comes in. This happens to be a sample from like the common application and the types of elements that we have to review, as well as an essay sample. And so how each of our universities would review this applicant would vary. So we would look at the academics, we would look at the scores, we would look at the essay, all of these different pieces. And despite having the same applicant, each of us might reach a different decision, or we might reach the same decision, but for different reasons as we weigh these different elements differently depending on our institution and our own processes. So we just want to further highlight the fact that each university has their own process and priorities when reviewing a particular application. So it isn't always as straightforward of a process as it might seem because of all those different factors that come into play when reviewing applications. So I think what we'll do is I'll just briefly talk about the different types of decisions that you could receive as an applicant. And that would be that you kind of have three different overall categories of admission that are possible: either being admitted, not being admitted, so perhaps being denied admission, or being waitlisted, which means that you aren't admitted yet, but it's possible that you could be if space becomes available for a particular class. And so if you are receive a waitlist offer, then we do recommend not putting all of your options into that one area, perhaps applying to different universities to keep more options on the table for yourself. And so then after you have received offers of admission, you then have those next steps of determining where you want to study and deciding, ultimately notifying the university where you want to go through confirming that admission. And then for the other pieces of that, whether if you have not been denied admission, or if you have been denied admission, we want to reiterate the fact that that's not always the end of the road for students. There is the opportunity to appeal a decision, or you could always look at applying to that university later as a transfer student or even for graduate level study. So there are different steps in the process even after you receive that admissions decision. And if you ever need clarification on that, kind of our recurring theme is to always reach out to the university to learn about your options available. So we are now wanting to transition into the Q&A time, and to lead into this, I'm going to have just each university that's represented here today just give one fun fact about our institution, and then we'll open it up to you guys for questions. So Aisha, if you want to give a fun fact about Florida to kick us off.
Sure. My favorite fact about the University of Florida is that we have actual gators on campus. And I know that sounds a little bit intimidating, but it's not. The gators are a mascot, and we have lots of lakes and rivers here on campus. And so we have actual real life gators in them, and they are completely harmless. But you can definitely go out and watch them. It's a great activity and a great way to be outside and enjoy our great Florida weather.
Great. For the University of Missouri, my fun fact is that we have the oldest school of journalism in the world. So that's one of our claims to fame. So lots of opportunities to study journalism and mass media communications at Mizzou.
Ooh, all right. So my fun fact for CU Boulder, I would really say, is our location. So we are located right in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. So we actually have more miles of trails than we do of roads, and are about 45 minutes away from the closest ski resort. So our students definitely take advantage of the outdoors, both for activities as well as for academics.
Oh, me. I was like thinking of my one fun fact because it's hard to narrow it down to one. I'm going to steal Abby's sort of and also say location, but that is because we are on an isthmus, and we are one of the only universities in the nation on an isthmus, which means we're surrounded by lakes. We're downtown in the middle of a city, but we're surrounded by lakes, lots of nature.
For the U of O, I guess, well, one of my favorite facts is that our campus is actually an arboretum. So we have over 5,000 trees right on our campus. So green is definitely in our DNA. We focus a lot on the environment, and just, you know, the location is great as well, with dynamic landscapes and forests and rivers all over kind of where we are. So that would be my fun fact.
Awesome. So these are our admissions websites here. And what we're going to do is put into the chat both our the form I put in the beginning if you want to receive additional information from any of our institutions, as well as a post-event flyer we put together that have links to all of our contact information and ways to stay in touch with us. But for now, we want to turn it back over to you all for questions. So I know that we will have some help in facilitating the Q&A, but you are welcome to put those into the Q&A or into the chat. So we look forward to receiving those questions you might have.
Thank you so much for this very detailed and valuable information that you all provided. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure the people that are watching and that will watch this session will also learn a lot. We do have a couple of questions, and I wanted to begin with testing. Could any of you help us understand a little bit about what does test optional really mean? As in, what else matters if there's not tests? And in regards to that, what kinds of English proficiency tests do you accept? Or do you know, because sometimes, for example, here in Guatemala, there are some schools that do a variety of tests that are not necessarily international tests. Do these count or do they not count? Can you help us out understanding this?
Yes, I think we can probably hop around for some of these because it is one of those things that does vary from one university to another in terms of what test optional really means for a particular university, as well as the types of English proficiency exams and other exams that they might accept. So at the University of Missouri, for example, we do not require the SAT for admission. We have not, prior to COVID, we did not require SAT or ACT for international students. For US citizens, we now do not require it, at least for the next 2 years, so 2 application cycles. However, we are a little bit different at Mizzou when it comes to SAT, ACT and scholarships, because our automatic merit-based awards are structured based on SAT scores. So that's why if you have taken the exam scores, we recommend submitting them because it's just very straightforward and simple. However, because of everything going on, we know that's not always possible. So that in our case, we still have an alternate process for students who are unable to take the exam scores and are still able to be considered for those scholarships and awards. So in our case, when we say it's optional, it's that it would not negatively impact your admission decision. And in other universities, there's some variation there in terms of whether or not they would even look at it, period, whether or not you have it. So it just varies from one institution to another. When it comes to English proficiency scores, we accept most commonly TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo. There are a few other exam scores we accept, and I can put a link on our website to the additional test exams we take for English.
Right, thank you so much. I think adding to that English test question, I would like to say that you should always verify with the institution you are applying to which tests do they accept, because it may be all of the exams that exist, or it may just be one of them, right? And so you should always, don't be afraid to contact them and ask them if you're still confused after doing your work and researching on their site. So another question that we have is regarding potential delays. So what is the best way to face any potential delays with my application? For example, if one of the requirements is not available in time for the application deadline, how should I proceed? Any advice on this?
I would say reach out to your admissions counselor and let them know what is going on. You will find that we as admissions counselors, we are here to help and to try to provide as much information as possible and hopefully alleviate some of your fears and anxieties. So it's always worth just reaching out to your admissions counselor or to the Office of Admissions and just kind of let them know what's going on, perhaps what the timeline looks like, and then they should be able to provide you any additional information.
Thank you. One other question is, how can I update any of the requirements after I have submitted my application by the deadline? So can I edit anything after I've submitted it?
I would say, again, to echo Abby, email your admissions counselor. In most cases, yes, we'll of course let you edit or update or change things, but the way that a university is going to potentially go about doing that will differ depending on the institution. So you want to reach out to your admissions counselor as soon as you recognize that you want something updated and changed, and we can go about moving that through the processing realm on our end.
And maybe a follow-up question with that. If I'm an applicant, can I edit anything in my application that I choose to do so after I submit it? Or are there specific things that I could update or edit?
So I know on the Common App, once you submit the Common App to like a certain institution, so for example, if a student were to submit it to Missouri, they're going to get that version of the Common App. But then if the student goes in and changes and updates things and submits it to me at UW-Madison, I'm going to get that second version, but Missouri might not, probably will not get that second version. They're only getting the first one. And so again, depending on what you're wanting to change and what you're wanting to update, not all the institutions that you're sending a Common App to are going to get the same thing.
Yeah, so you have to stay on top of it, right? And like think a step further. So we have one question regarding application fees. Where can I find what are those application fees for the universities?
A really good resource is there is a requirements chart on the Common application. which is an excellent resource for any school that is a part of the Common App, which are a lot of different schools. It'll list what the institutions require. They try to keep it pretty up to date, which is nice. And it'll tell you if they require an application fee, exactly how much that fee is. So you have a list of all of the application fees in pretty much one spot. And so you can look for that particular institution, slide over to application fee area, and just kind of see what that fee is. And you can also check with an institution directly, of course, on their admissions websites. They're always going to list, what their application fee is, and also whether or not there is the possibility of having a waiver of the application fee.
Thanks so much. One interesting question is, if I am waitlisted, can I do anything to be a stronger candidate if and when a spot becomes available?
I can go ahead and take this one. I mean, this might be, again, differing. It might be different from different institutions. I know when, for example, a U of O student is waitlisted, sometimes we're looking for maybe newer information or, more, I guess maybe like we're waiting for your final semester grades or like different information that we might be able to add to make an application a little bit stronger. And so I think maybe, different things like that might be what institutions are looking for. But again, it might be something that each institution might have a different process when it comes to kind of how their waitlist process goes. But this is a little taste of what the U of O might ask for.
Right, but it may be from them, right? They'll request you as an applicant more information on X, Y, or Z, right?
Yeah, usually we would send maybe a letter or an email with like different things that they could submit to strengthen their application.
Okay, thank you. We have one question for University of Florida regarding the deadline. Is there only one deadline a year?
Yeah, so we only have one freshman admission deadline each year, and it's going to be November 1st. So we don't have an early action. A lot of schools will have an early action deadline than a regular decision deadline. We just have one regular decision deadline of November 1st, but that's only for the application itself. So your other materials, like your transcripts and your test scores, those are going to be due by December 31st. And this year is extra funny. So we have kind of adjusted our deadlines because we know that this year in particular is challenging for everyone. So we've pushed our November 1st deadline to November 16th. We just got word of that today, so I just remembered. So we are giving students additional time to apply this year up until November 16th. And then we are going to be pretty flexible with that materials deadline of December 31st as well. So we'll probably accept things all the way through January.
Thank you. And we have one last question. I know we focused mostly on as an undergraduate applicant, but somebody's wondering, can you give information about master's degrees? What are the most important parts that universities review for an application? If you can just give them maybe a general idea on this notion of master's.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kind of tackle that question. Especially when you're thinking of universities like the ones represented here today, being large research universities, the process at the graduate level works a lot differently than essentially what we've described today, because this is a very centralized process and that you apply through one admissions office and then it's kind of reviewed and then you receive your decision kind of all in one house. At the graduate level, it works differently in that oftentimes the admissions requirements will vary from one graduate program to another, or what even the specific application materials are looking for could also vary. So the reason for that is that it's very decentralized and that those different programs at the master's and especially PhD level will set those for that particular academic area. And so oftentimes those particular units are the ones making the decision instead of that centralized graduate office. So it's difficult to always say what grad programs in general are looking for. And often your first step is to go to the graduate studies website of the program you're interested in, so graduate studies or graduate school, because they're a really great resource for learning more about the particular programs offered and what those specific requirements might be from one program to another. And they will also very often have contact information for the graduate program director or the graduate office contact person for that particular department. So that's who you can connect with to learn more about those specifics and what they're looking for. Because sometimes they might not even have minimum requirements. They might be able to provide you with more of a profile of what their typical graduate student will look like who's admitted to their program. So unfortunately, it's a little bit of a vague answer, but that's just because the system works a little bit differently from the bachelor's level to the master's and PhD.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So that's all the questions we have. I just want to thank you again for all of your time and effort in this presentation. It's a very valuable resource that will remain up on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel for reference. Thank you so much for being here, all of our participants and all of you. I hope you're all safe and stay healthy, and I hope we can meet again soon. Thank you everyone for being here. Bye-bye.